So how can we use JavaScript to define styles for HTML elements? Let's imagine we are having this div right here. And let's say this div has an ID of container, for example. Now we want to get this container instead of JavaScript by saying const container is equal to document.get element by ID. And this one has the ID of container. So we're getting the element that has the ID of container. Now we want to style this container by using JavaScript. So we can say container. Now we can use .style, for example. And by using .style, we are saying we want to define or we want to have access to a CSS property. And right here, we have access to a lot of properties. So we can use bottom, for example. We can use left. We can also use background, for example. And in our case, let's say we want to use background. So let's say background is going to be equal to yellow, for example. Let's save that one. And as you can see, we're not seeing anything. And the reason for this is that we need a width and a height to set a background. So we can also say container.style.width is going to be equal to 100 pixels and container.style.height is going to be equal to 100 pixels. Let's save that one. And as you can see, we're getting this yellow square right here. So usually you can just use the reference variable followed by a .style to access a CSS property, followed by the name of the CSS property, and then you can just use normal CSS code inside of those quotation marks to define a property. Now you can also use JavaScript to add a CSS class or remove a CSS class from an element. So let's, for example, say we create a style.css file, and we're also going to link the style.css file inside of our HTML code, like so. So now all of this code here is valid. And now let's, for example, create a class of blue, for example. So .blue. Now we're going to say that class has a width of 200 pixels, a height of 200 pixels, and a background of blue, for example. So now let's create another div right below. And let's say that div has the ID of blue minus container. Now we can grab this blue container right here instead of our script tag by saying const blue container is equal to document get element by ID. We're going to grab the blue container. And now let's say we wanted to add the class name to this container right here. So we want to add the class blue to this container by using code. And we can do so by saying blue container dot classList dot add. And now we can add the class, for example, blue minus container. Or in our case, actually the class is just blue. So that was my bad. So we have to add the class blue. Now we are ending the statement by using a semicolon. And now we added the class blue to this element right here by using JavaScript. And as you can see, we have this blue container. We can also go ahead and remove this class by using blue container.classList.remove instead of .add. And we can also define the class in here. And as you can see, now we have removed the class. And something that is important when you work with buttons later on is the toggle method. So you can also say blue container.classList.toggle, and then you can define the class. And this essentially means if you have a class of blue, you're going to remove this class. But if you don't have a class of blue yet, then you're going to add the class. And this is important if you think about a button click, for example, and if the user clicks on a button and the class does not exist yet, you want to add the class. But if the class exists, you want to remove the class.